There are so many mixed feelings about Colorado heading into the 2023 season. How good are they going to be? How bad are they going to be? Who's going to do what? We're going to talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I'm your host, Kevin Borwa, and today we have a special guest joining us to talk about what Colorado's biggest questions are, their move to the Big 12, and the trajectory of the program. Brett Ciancia, the owner of Pick Six Previews. Brett, how you doing?
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be talking some Colorado football here. It's funny, when we first booked this, I thought it was already just going to be a season preview, but the crazy news week for Colorado fans with the Big 12 return, I should say. So we got a lot to cover here. I'm excited to be on with you.
A lot to cover indeed, and Brett is the writer, the creator, the owner of one of the best preview magazines out there. He's so detailed, dives into every single program, and that's what makes him qualified to talk about our Buffs, your Buffs, whoever's Buffs they are. We're going to talk about them today. So, Brett, you do a deep dive on every single program in college football, it feels like. You dive into the transfers, the new additions, the returning guys, which for Colorado, there's like 10, so not many to dive into there. But transfers, there's a lot of new people. There's a lot of people projecting Colorado to be on the bottom end of the Pac-12. Their win total is currently at 3.5. But fans are very bullish on them, making a lot of bets for them to win the title. What did you see when you did your deep dive into Colorado?
Yeah, well, here at Pick Six Previews, it's a one-man company. So I'm doing all 69 Power 5 teams, and I've previewed them all the last 12 years. So out of all those team previews, this one was very unique. I've never seen anything like the 2023 Colorado preview. Not only a coaching change, and not only such a big persona coming to the Pac-12 in Colorado with Deion Sanders, but just the overall Frankenstein-style roster where you have some 65 new additions to the roster in Boulder. I mean, you go down each position group, all 5 QBs are gone, all 10 receivers are gone. I think it's 20 out of 22 of the 2 deep on defense are gone. It's just insane turnover. So that itself is a big storyline. But yeah, it's important to remember this is coming off one of the lowest rated teams that I've ever reviewed. My game grader formula dates back to, I think it was 2010. I started it. This is one of the lowest ever in Power 5. So from that starting point, most of the team is gone. So that's interesting. But it's wide open. It's one of the most variable teams coming into the season. I think 3.5 is a little low. I think they get near that 5 mark. And if things click the right way, maybe a bowl appearance. But it's funny. I was on Sirius XM earlier in the offseason. They were asking me, can Colorado hit 10 wins? And I was saying maybe half is a good target. I think 5 or 6 would be a great first year for Deion.
Yeah, I think 6 wins is kind of where I've been hovering. And when I did my game-by-game prediction, I have them winning 6 games. I think they get the benefit of playing all the other teams that are going to be towards the bottom of the Pac-12, so that helps. Like you said, they upgraded the roster in just about every manner you could, which last year's roster was as bad as it gets, which no offense to those guys out there. It just did not click, did not work. When you're previewing a team like Colorado and you dive into this team in particular, what stands out like a sore thumb as your biggest concern about them?
Yeah, well, the biggest concern is probably the offensive line. Now, all these grades and metrics last year, they were pretty poor across the board. I mean, they were bottom 10 in almost every offensive metric, dead last overall in offense in my numbers. Defense wasn't much better. So pick your stat. They were in the bottom tier of the Pac-12 and nationally. So from that starting point, though, you look then, all right, who's coming back and who have they added? And at the other position groups, I feel they've added some true 4-star players, even some 5 stars, just hitting all-time new heights there. At cornerback, there's some strengths. I like the pair of running backs they added. QB, Deion Sanders has really impressed at the FCS level. But for the weakness, I'd go offensive line. It was poor last year. I know you get Van Wells back, a proven guy. But from there, it's going to be a couple MAC players, and it's very uncertain. So I'd say offensive line, and then maybe receiver. I know it's a good 1-2 punch there with the USF transfer and Hunter if he's going to go fully 2 ways. But outside of that, I think you need a couple more playmakers to emerge. So I'll go offensive line and then the second and third receiver roles.
Okay. I like the offensive line concerns me too, Brett. I'll tell you. I talked about it yesterday. I did my 4 things to look out for fall camp, and one of them was just simply a positive review about the offensive line play. Every time I contact people who are in Boulder, I'm out here in California, so I'm not there at the practices every day, but I have people there watching. I have people who are around the program. And then I even read the national stuff about the offensive line, and it's just never positive. It's always we'd like to see we'd like to see them improve. We'd like to see them get used to the system, or we'd like to see them get used to the speed of the system because Sean Lewis likes to play fast, and that's a bigger concern of mine. The wide receivers, I'm very confident that they got so many talented ones that it'll play itself out. But the offensive line concerns me, and then the backup quarterback situation. And I always say this: God forbid Shedeur Sanders gets hurt. You don't want your quarterback getting hurt, and you don't want anybody getting hurt. But Shedeur Sanders' backups are all freshmen, and then they brought in a JUCO guy who, based off of his stats and his performance at his junior colleges, he was never like the main guy. And so you don't want Shedeur going down because then the season could go downhill real quick. Let's get positive about the Buffs. What is something that maybe your metrics kind of shine positively for them, or they bring out a bright spot for Colorado in 2023?
Yeah, sure. Well, the optimist spin there, going back to offensive line, is I think that Bill O'Boyle is a really good offensive line coach. My numbers show it. His Kent State line last year was top 20 in my offensive line push number. That's one of the most valuable ones I have in the book there. And yeah, so not only that, but he's coming here with his offensive coordinator, well, I guess head coach at Kent State in Lewis, and then bringing 2 offensive linemen with him. So there's some potential there for a breakthrough. Even though it was labeled as a weakness, I could see the optimist spin. But in terms of strengths, the running back duo, I touched on it. Cavassier Smoke, very physical back. I saw him tear up the SEC for several seasons there with Chris Rodriguez at Kentucky. But now in more of a 1-2 punch there with Alton McCaskill, the Houston guy. He was projected as a Houston starter, and that shocked them when he left. So that's a strong 1-2 punch. What else? I liked a lot of the defensive guys. The cornerback room we touched on with Hunter, the first 5-star in a long time for Colorado, along with Carmani McLean, who I think was actually the first 5-star out of high school. I know that Colorado has landed some 5-star transfers, but high school wise, that was a major win for.
Oh, it looks like we lost Brett there. Let's continue on. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about. I think realistically, let's see. Wait till we get him back. I think realistically, Colorado has a lot of bright spots. I know he brought up the receiver room a little bit as being shaky. I think they have so much talent there. There's something to be excited about. The defense is the secondary is super strong. They got 6 starting caliber safeties out there. There's also the fact that they have some experienced linebackers. Here's Brett. He's back. I'm talking about the experience in the secondary, Brett. I was talking about why we lost you there for a second. Colorado has 6 starting caliber safeties in the secondary. And so in a league where it's going to be pass heavy, there's going to be talented quarterbacks slinging the rock around. Colorado has a good secondary. I wanted to get one more. I need like one specific thing from you, and it's Colorado wins 6 games if. And what would that if be for you?
Well, I think it'll be if Shedeur Sanders can make the transition from the FCS level up to the Power 5, up to the Pac-12 immediately. And that's a tough task. Now, speaking of the Pac-12 footprint, we've seen it a couple times. Vernon Adams comes to mind from Oregon when he came up from Eastern Washington and really reset the record books there. I think it was 2015. It was an okay job last year. Another example was Cam Ward going from Incarnate Word up to Washington State. So it's doable. So can he get used to the speed of the new game of the Power 5 level? Does he retain that touchdown to pick ratio? He's really sharp with the ball at Jackson State, but it's a lot faster here. And he's got a lot less offensive line to work with. So he's going to be having to scramble more, make snap decisions more, learn a new offense. So these are big variables. But if he is what he's chalked up to be, if he can break into that top half of the conference quarterback-wise, which, as I'm sure you and the listeners know, the Pac-12 is loaded at quarterback this year. So that's a tough task. But I think it's if he can elevate to the top half of the conference, then Colorado can make a bowl.
Yeah, I think Shedeur Sanders, I call him the wild card of college football, because if he's really good and there's not like an adjustment period where he's throwing missing spots and throw in some interceptions, Colorado could get off to a hot start, and that'd be huge because they immediately start with TCU. Then they host Nebraska, which is a big rivalry game, which is a rivalry game that most people don't, I wouldn't say know about, but don't realize how big of a game it is to those two fan bases. And then they have another rivalry game with Colorado State. And then they dive right into Pac-12 play with USC and Oregon. So if he gets off to a hot start, it could ease the schedule a little bit and help them get to those 6 wins. I totally agree. Before we move on, this episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is the perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that your part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confident is the name of the game, and when you shop for eBay Motors, there's over 122 million parts to choose from. You'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get those right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride eBay. The guaranteed fit only to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Okay, we're back with Brett Ciancia, Pick 6 previews. We're talking about Colorado's big move to the Big 12. I was honestly just going to talk to Brett about previewing the whole roster, but this move was just so catastrophic for the Pac-12 and so climatic for all of college football that we had to talk about it. And I had to get Brett's opinion about what this does for Colorado in the future, and what it does for them right now, if it changes how they recruit or anything, he would think. Because Colorado didn't have a lot of success in the Pac-12. I wrote about it today over at Athlon. Dan Lanning kind of threw shade at the program saying, is it really a big loss? They didn't do much, something along those lines. So, Brett, what do you make of this move to the Big 12 for the Buffs?
Yeah, well, it's been a tough 10, 20 years for the Colorado football program. I think it's 15 losing seasons out of the last 17. I mean, it's right up there with Kansas as one of the most, losing season streaks out there. So they needed a spark, and they got that spark with the Deion Sanders hire. Now we're all going to learn if this experiment worked or not in about 12 months or even 24 months, 2 seasons in. But you can't argue it definitely was a spark. It brought new talent to the program, a new recruiting profile, new national attention. I mean, you had a 2-time Pac-12 champ Utah, and you had a Heisman winner at USC. ESPN chose Colorado for their ESPN treatment for the spring game. I mean, it is a national storyline, and they needed a change, and we're going to see if it works. But beyond that, the conference affiliation was the next thing, and just seeing the writing on the wall with the Pac-12 media deal falling through, and then just seeing how the Big 12 is strengthening. And given that that's their old history roots, the Big 8, the Big 12, I think it provides more of a recruiting pipeline into Texas. And now with UCF in that conference, maybe even a little bit slice of Florida, given Deion Sanders' history. But yeah, so I could see it both ways with the conference realignment. I'm old school. I like the traditional regionality of the sport. So in a way, Colorado returning to their old profile, I like.
Yeah, I think
as long as it doesn't sink the whole Pac-12. I mean, USC and UCLA started the sinking of the Pac-12. I just don't want to see a historic conference erased. So hopefully they can backfill and double down on the West Coast geography and keep that alive. But I think it's a good move for Colorado.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there. I was just going to jump in and say I totally agree with keeping the geography, the history together, especially myself. I talk about it all the time. My listeners probably get a little tired of it, but my first job out of college during the pandemic was the Pac-12 network. So my former employer is the Pac-12. So I always have a soft spot for the conference. And I definitely don't want to see college football turn into basically the equivalent of a super league where it's just the top 2 or 3 conferences. But I'd love to see the Pac-12 get some schools like you mentioned. Back to Colorado going to the Big 12, though. What I think a lot of people don't realize is how up for grabs the Big 12 is. And I'm sure you noticed it in your preview this year outside of Texas. And you can't even really mention TCU because they're reloading at so many positions. Heading into the next season, Colorado has an opportunity to kind of supplant themselves, at least I think, as one of the premier teams in the Big 12. I think right now the Big 12 is full of programs who are either rebuilding or having down years. And so if Colorado can get hit on all these transfers, maybe add in a couple more very highly touted recruits that could play right away, they could find themselves succeeding immediately in the Big 12. What do you think about that, Brett?
Yeah, it's interesting because with the Big 12, you are losing Oklahoma and Texas. Those are your two blue blood programs with all the history, the tradition, but really the big recruiting budgets and recruiting profile. They're annual top 10, top 15 recruiters. So you take those two out of there, and there really aren't many annual top 25 recruiters left in the conference. I mean, TCU recently has been hot. But besides that, I mean, it's up for grabs recruiting wise. And, I think recruiting trickles down to on-field success. You have a lot of outliers there. You have great developers like Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. Yeah, I mean, if you can win the recruiting war in the Big 12, you have a chance to compete every year. And I think Deion's already proven he can do that. So let's see now. I want to see another year under his belt, more proof of the concept on the field. Like if this thing comes out, if they make a bowl game next year, these recruits are going to flock even more to Boulder. I know that's a high standard, but I just can't imagine the momentum that a bowl season would get for the program. But I agree with you. It's a conference now that doesn't really have a annual playoff contender. There's no Clemson Giant or a Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, or an Alabama, LSU, Georgia. So there isn't really that dominant threat, and the path is wide open. Just look at the teams that have made the title game recently, last couple of years. I mean, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and then it flipped into being TCU, Kansas State. So it's wide open every year. I think it's a really underappreciated conference nationally. You see people bashing their lack of a defense. It's kind of out of touch anymore. They actually play pretty good defense. They've gotten creative on how to stop those offenses. But it's passionate fan bases. They fill their stadium more than they do out west and more than they do in the ACC. So I think it's a great conference.
Yeah, I think the Big 12 has a lot to offer for Colorado and just fans everywhere. Two stats that stood out to me in terms of why I think the Big 12 is even more up for grabs. As you mentioned, recruiting. I went back on 24/7 Sports. Every year since 2010 was the furthest year it could go back with the conference rankings. Texas and Oklahoma were 1 or 2, not specific order, but they were 1 and 2, whether it be Texas 1, Oklahoma 2, vice versa. So they dominated recruiting. Colorado, I think, like you said, they get to a bowl game. Those recruits, they already have 5 stars interested in Colorado. But I think the big thing for recruits is they want to see some on-field product. And so if they get to a bowl game, those recruits that are interested in Colorado may end up going to Colorado in the future. And then the other stat that stood out to me was outside of these past 2 seasons, like you mentioned, since 1998, every Big 12 title game where they've had a game and not just a winner based on record, Texas and Oklahoma were involved except for these past 2. So there's a wide open conference. Colorado's on the come up. And I would say the Big 12 as a whole, their teams are all in a finding myself phase. Kansas is looking to emerge. Kansas State is looking to take that next step. They were a few plays away from winning the Big 12 championship this past year. Oklahoma State they're on the downslide. Iowa State, very big question mark with Hunter Deckers and his gambling situation. We got Baylor. Who knows what they are? Dave Aranda had them looking really good. Now we don't know. So Colorado could come in if they go hot and make it to a bowl game. They could come in and be a premier team in the program, which is something that they hadn't even come close to in the Pac-12. Brett talked about it. They had 2 winning seasons in this long decade. And honestly, I say it's 1.5 because one of them was the COVID year. So they went 4-2. Do we count that? Not really sure. But either way, Colorado has the chance to move up. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the trajectory of Colorado in the Big 12 this season. And Brett's going to dive into his analytics and talk about what really makes a team special or not so special when we come back. We are back. We're talking about the trajectory of Colorado. Brett, Pick Six Previews, the man himself. You're kind of mysterious because we don't have you on camera here. So it's like the voice from above. Talk to us about what direction you see Colorado's going into and what they need to do to make sure it stays positive, if it is positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Colorado, it can only go up from here. And I say that as a pun or whatever, but also statistically because with my game grader formula, they were dead last in the conference, dead last in Power 5. 69th out of all 69 last year. One of the worst Power 5 teams I've ever graded. One of the worst offenses we've ever graded, and the defense wasn't much better. And they return literally nobody. So, I mean, it's a completely new Frankenstein roster like we touched on. So I think it's only got to get better. It's going to improve from 1 win, 1-11 last year. They're going to rise up from that. But I think longer term is where it really gets interesting because this is the spark that they needed. Doing the same thing, the same hire and fire cycle every 3 years and really being out of the national spotlight in the Pac-12 they didn't really belong there. I know there's a lot of California alumni, but they seem like a Midwest Big 12 kind of team and program. At least that's where their history is. So I think longer term, it's really interesting. I think they're back on the map now. They're back on the recruiting landscape. You see that they've already signed guys. They're competing for high-profile guys. And the transfer portal era and NIL couldn't have meshed better with the hire of Deion Sanders. I mean, I think it's a perfect match. So, and I think a lot of national people and fans, they just think of him as the player and the guy in the commercials, the Aflac ads. He did a really good coaching job there at Jackson State. I mean, they hadn't been no winning seasons in the last 8 years or something, and he goes 23-3. So I'm impressed with what he did on the field there as a coach and what he's been able to do talent acquisition wise already. So all those things are exciting. You already touched on how wide open the Big 12 is. You take out the 2 blue blood programs, and you're also joining there where there's 4 newcomers to the Power 5 scene. So you're catching some of these programs in a transition phase. You know, your Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, Houston. So a leg up on all of those programs. So it should be a really exciting time for Colorado. I saw there was all-time spring game numbers. I know that they have some sellouts already forecasted. I'm actually hoping to be up there for that Nebraska-Colorado game. It's one of the national games I've circled as a potential landing spot. I try and get to places all over the country during the season, and never been out to Boulder. I've heard great things, beautiful setting, great campus. I want to see all of that, and why not see it at its peak? So that's on the radar. So here you go. They're back on the national spotlight, back to their original, footprint there in the Midwest and the Big 8, the Big 12. And I think it's always up from here.
You know, it's interesting when Mr. Pick Six Previews is going to be there in person. I was there for the spring game. That was my first time in Boulder. It was truly amazing. I won't lie to you. You would have thought it was like the Georgia spring game. Like, it was sold out. People were tailgating at 8 a.m. in the snow. Like, it was just, the vibes were there. It was immaculate. Something you talked about and you've mentioned throughout the episode is your grading system. Obviously, I don't want you to reveal your secrets because that's what makes you the most accurate preview magazine in the biz outside of the 2 athlon previews for TCU and Stanford. Shout out to myself.
Nice job.
There we go. Little plug. But you're the most accurate. You've been voted the most accurate for years and years. What do you look for, and what is your metric kind of based off of, without obviously revealing the secret sauce?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I like to take a holistic approach. I know that there are some metrics guys out there where they literally just hit enter on their formula, and that's what it spits out. But football is a lot deeper than that. There's way more personalities involved. There's coaching changes. There's schemes. So I'm a numbers guy first, but I mean, I'm more of a football guy. I like to talk to these head coaches, talk to the coordinators, really get an understanding of what they're trying to install, how their player personnel is matching up, where they are roster wise. And then watching as much as I can. I mean, on Saturdays in the fall, I have 4 TVs going from midnight till 2 a.m. Speaking of Pac-12 Network, I'm one of the only Pennsylvanians out here watching Pac-12 Network, I assure you, keeping them in business here on the East Coast. So, so I would say my answer to your question is it's a very holistic approach. I look for every morsel of information, every detail I can. Numbers wise, I like to adjust for the opponent's strength. So you can start to compare apples to apples. I like to go look per play metrics more than per game. Just you can go on and on with the numbers, but I think it's putting it into perspective because you read some other magazines, it's a lot of acronyms or it's like reading computer code almost, but I like to make it readable. I like to tell you the storyline and what's happening. Yeah, I'll throw in some numbers. They're there on the page on the left side if you want to see where they stack up, but it's putting it into football terms, readable terms. And it's gotten me the 10-year title, the 5-year title, and the 3-year. So all 3, intervals that they run over there at Stas, and I have the Triple Crown right now.
I'd love to see it. My 2 previews are coming for you. No, I'm just kidding. Brett does a fantastic job. And if you guys want a link to purchase his magazine, it will be in the comment section below. So make sure to check that out. Brett, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you diving into Colorado from a different standpoint from what I've had. I've had people from Colorado who cover the program, who's closely come and dive into it. I appreciate someone who covers the national scale. I need a bold prediction about Colorado from you, based on a number or something that you saw that stands out that many people don't know about.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, first I'll say congrats to you, Kevin. I came across you when you were interviewing Coach Taylor at Stanford, and then I saw you doing a Colorado piece, and I'm thinking this guy's all over the place. He's covering football at every angle, so I appreciate your work. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Keep it up. And so the bold prediction for Colorado, putting me on the spot here. I do have them down at 10th out of 12 in the Pac-12. So I had them tied with Arizona State. It is a tough schedule. I mean, you draw TCU and Nebraska in the non-conference. Usually that's where you can stack up a couple W's. But I'll say this. Here's the bold prediction. I think they'll be the most improved defense in America for 2020, 2023. Now, I say that with a little bit of an asterisk because they were dead last. So, but I do think they're going to improve big time. Maybe they go from dead last to middle of the pack, but that'll be reflected in wins. So the days of 1-10, I think, are gone. So it's all up from here.
Hey, a middle of the pack defense would be ideal for many teams across the country. You give USC an average defense last year, and they're probably in the playoff. Realistically, that's a great improvement. You guys as Colorado fans are excited to see the growth of the team, and you heard it here from Brett Ciancia, for Pick Six Previews, that it's going to happen. It's going to take some time. It's going to happen eventually. So I appreciate Brett for joining, and you guys have a great Tuesday. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Buffs. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and make sure to purchase your Pick Six Previews magazine. The link will be below in the comment section.